This is Bill Brady recording another video for the Kingship course. This video again is about the Ecclesia, and this specific video is about Israel as the Ecclesia. I'm going to show you a verse in Acts 7. This is New American Standard, speaking about Moses. Acts 7:38. This is the one who was in the assembly. See the little footnote here. Tells us that the Greek word that's being translated as assembly here is ecclesia. The Greek word ecclesia has two kappas, Ks, and the English word that I use is ECC. The Greek word is EKK. Okay, this is the one, Moses, who was in the ecclesia in the wilderness together with the angel who spoke to him at length on Mount Sinai, and who was with our fathers and he received living words to pass on to you. Acts 7:38, New American Standard Bible. So, Israel, who came out of Egypt with 1.5 million people or so, is the estimate I've seen, is considered or was an ecclesia, one giant ecclesia, not an ecclesia in a city, like Paul wrote to the ecclesia in Ephesus or the ecclesia in Rome or the ecclesia in Corinth and so on. But this is what we might call the Universal Ecclesia. At that time, this was everybody that was in the Universal Ecclesia, 1.5 million people coming out of Egypt in the wilderness as an ecclesia. Then in Acts and the epistles, we have ecclesias in various cities. And what I saw overnight, the revelation was given to me, I understand now, the ecclesia in the wilderness, Israel in the wilderness, 1.5 million people, was the ecclesia with respect to Passover. There's 3 major feasts: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. This is what the Universal Ecclesia looked like, having just experienced Passover in Egypt. So this is the Passover Ecclesia. The Ecclesia in Acts and the epistles is the Pentecost Ecclesia. They had just experienced Pentecost, Acts chapter 2, right? And there will in the future be a Tabernacles Ecclesia. So first there was a Passover Ecclesia, Israel in the wilderness, which is also an example of the Universal Ecclesia, because that was every believer in the world at that time. I suppose there may have been some odd ones here and there, but it was every believer that was gathered together into an ecclesia at that time. And then the ecclesias in cities we see in Acts and the epistles, beginning with the ecclesia in Jerusalem, was the first ecclesia after Pentecost. And then other ecclesias out amongst the nations. That's the ecclesia, the Pentecost ecclesia. And there will be a Tabernacles ecclesia. Now, why am I emphasizing this? For a long time, I had bypassed ecclesia. I mean, I came out of the church and into heavenly realms and became a king and so on, all without the benefit of an ecclesia, you might think, though actually the group of people that I was with probably was functioning as an ecclesia to some extent. But my point is, in my thinking, I had entirely bypassed ecclesia. I mean, because there weren't any ecclesias that I knew about. All I knew about were churches, and I came out of the church in order to go up into heavenly realms and overcome to become a king. And now what I'm seeing very clearly is ecclesia has several purposes that God uses the ecclesia to accomplish. One is coming to a place of overcoming individually and coming to a place overcoming as an ecclesia. But another we've already talked about is functioning as an ecclesia. And the ecclesia actually brings us to the place of kingship. These are things that are supposed to happen in ecclesias if you've got an ecclesia that's functioning the way it's supposed to. Some people in the 7 letters to the 7 ecclesias in the revelation of Jesus Christ, chapters 2 and 3, individuals overcome, but also ecclesias overcome, and some ecclesias don't go as far as they needed to in overcoming with respect to 7 separate letters. They just overcame to a certain extent and stopped and didn't get to the place of full overcoming. And at that point, the individual had to come out of the ecclesia and go through all the rest of the process of overcoming and become a king. So for me, an ecclesia was something that I left behind when I left the church behind, because there wasn't any ecclesias that I was aware of that I could be a part of. But what I'm seeing now is the ecclesia is part of God's plan from pretty much from beginning to end, at least from the point that Israel became a nation. You remember that Abraham was told that he would be made into a great nation. I will make you into a great nation. And the great nation that God made Israel into, made Abraham into, was Israel 2 generations later. So Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob had his name changed to Israel. Now you've got an individual called Israel. And then Jacob/Israel has 12 sons who are the heads of the 12 tribes, and we end up with a nation, a great nation of Israel. By the time it comes out of Egypt, it's 1.5 million people, the estimate I've been taught or have heard. So anyway, my point is, from the point of Abraham, ecclesia is something that God has it's part of God's plan. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Joseph went down into Egypt. Pharaoh arose who didn't know Joseph. That Pharaoh enslaved Israel. Moses came to that enslaved Israel many years later, and then God brought them out of Egypt at the time that he brought them into Passover. And then with Pentecost, we have more ecclesias. There's still a universal ecclesia. It's not all in one physical geographical place, but there's still a universal ecclesia. And there are ecclesias in major cities. Paul planted many of these ecclesias. And there were even more than 7 ecclesia in Asia Minor, where John wrote the 7 letters to the 7 ecclesias. Each of those 7 ecclesias was on a mail route that started from the Isle of Patmos, where John was. The letter that the revelation of Jesus Christ was brought from the Isle of Patmos, where John was in prison, brought to Ephesus, which is the first of the 7 ecclesias, and then it went on a crescent-shaped journey from city to city to city, starting with Ephesus and ending with, if I remember correctly, Laodicea, 7 ecclesias. And each of those 7 ecclesias is like the center of a burst with other ecclesias around them, that the letter then went from, I'm sure it was copied and sent from the major ecclesia that had been sent to, the one that was on the postal route, and then passed around the whole general area to all the other ecclesias in that area. So my point here overall is that the overall plan of God includes purpose for ecclesia. There was ecclesia that was experienced Pentecost and became ecclesia at that point. Came out of Egypt. Then there was all these ecclesias in various cities after Pentecost, but beginning in Jerusalem. So the Jerusalem ecclesia was the first ecclesia that experienced Pentecost. Then it spread to all other kinds of places. And someday, when we move fully into tabernacles, there will be a tabernacles form of the ecclesia. God is not going to dispense with the idea or the plan of ecclesia. He just keeps on adding to it. Yeshua came as the Word who who became flesh and dwelt among us, and the word dwelt is tabernacles. So Yeshua was the first person to actually experience tabernacles, and somehow that experience that Yeshua had while he was here on the earth the first time is something that will be expanded out into all of the ecclesias, and there will be ecclesias that will move from Pentecost to tabernacles. Just like today, there are ecclesias that are stuck in Passover because they've never experienced Pentecost. And then there will be other ecclesias that move on from being a Pentecost ecclesia to being a tabernacle ecclesia, and probably a bunch that stay behind and don't make the transition. So ecclesias are central to the plan of God. The only reason I didn't experience ecclesia was there wasn't one around that I was aware of that I could be a part of and go through the journey from to the 7 levels of overcoming that are found in the revelation of Jesus Christ, chapters 2 and 3, that would bring me to kingship. I came to kingship apart from the ecclesia. Now, that's not completely true, because the group that I was involved with, One United Body, my perspective is that in some ways that group was functioning as an ecclesia. So within that ecclesia, I experienced some of these things. Though actually, I overcame and sat down on the throne as a king quite early on in my experience with One United Body. Okay, so there is the Universal Ecclesia, then there are city ecclesias, and then there are subgroups within city ecclesias that do functions like cast out demons, heal the sick, various subgroup functions that don't happen in the regular Sunday gathering, where we've talked about the most previous recording to this, we talked about what's supposed to happen in that gathering. When the ecclesia gathers, it functions in that way. But there's other functions that the ecclesia has in subgroups, and there are other meetings or gatherings that the ecclesia has, probably teaching meetings. I can remember where Paul was visiting a particular ecclesia, and he taught them in a upper room late into the night, to the point that one of the young men who was sitting in a windowsill in an open window fell out and died. And then Paul resurrected from the dead, and Paul went back in and talked to them until sunrise, and then Paul left and went on his journey. So that was an ecclesia that he had gathered together for teaching. So there's various kinds of gatherings that the ecclesia has. There are subgroups for various functions, but there is one ecclesia in every city. And then there's the Universal Ecclesia. So we have universal, city, and then subgroups. And then we also have the Passover Ecclesia, the Pentecost Ecclesia, and one day we will have the Tabernacles Ecclesia. Okay. Please like, share, and subscribe. That helps, because the algorithm on YouTube will spread this video further into other people because there are likes, shares, and subscribes. And also, please comment if you can do so positively. Though I also welcome disagreement, dialogue, where we discuss, and further revelation comes out of a dialogue that's going on between 2 or more people. And you can put your comment in the comments. I'd love to see positive comments and see that this is benefiting you. And if you felt that way about previous videos, if you can go back and like some or all of those videos also, that would be helpful, because that will again increase have the algorithm spread this around more. But also, if you have a question about something I'm saying, please feel free to put that in the comments, and I will dialogue with you about that. So again, summarizing, there is the Universal Ecclesia, City-wide Ecclesias, and then subgroups within ecclesias that do particular functions. And then also there is the Passover Ecclesia, at the time that Israel came out of Egypt, that was the Passover Ecclesia. It also was the Universal Ecclesia at that time. Today, some groups that are still churches as opposed to being ecclesia, they don't have a lampstand given to them yet. They're not functioning in Pentecost at all. These are actually Passover ecclesias, I suppose you could say it that way. I've been using the word church for them, but they're also Passover ecclesias. Today, there are very few Pentecost ecclesias, but there are some, and there are some that don't even realize they're a Pentecost ecclesia because they've made the transition from Passover ecclesia to Pentecost ecclesia, and they do have a lampstand, but they aren't doing the other functions of ecclesia that we'll speak about in the following videos. And one day there will be Tabernacles ecclesia. Okay, enough on this topic for now. You may need to listen to this again.